We have just 3 speakers because Sheikh Hasan has not been able to join us this afternoon. So I'll give each of the speakers a little extra time to address us. We're going to start with Reverend Canon Robin Morrison, and he's the Bishop's Advisor for Church and Society in Wales, and organizer of the Christian-Muslim Dialogue series called Finding a Common Voice. And I'll introduce each speaker just before they speak.
Thank you. Do you want us here?
Whatever suits your fancy.
Oh, don't say that. It's good to be here, and may I add my thanks and appreciation not only to the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, but to everyone who's taught me so much already. I'm sorry I couldn't be here last night. I was back in Cardiff for an event with Chief Constables, and the Deputy Commissioner of the Met and a few of the assistants were there too, and we were discussing all sorts of things. And when I said I was coming here, their eyes lit up. And the rest of the evening went with a bit of a wow, because the interest from practitioners in the public sector and in the police in trying to understand how we deal with extremism and terrorism, of course, is growing all the time. And the Chief Constable I worked most closely with in Wales was head of the terrorist unit in the Met. So we've shared quite a few stories. 9/11. I was in Wales and finishing off a book on globalization. They can't, if I walk around, they can't hear me.
They can't hear you.
Okay. I decided that the first thing I should do was to go and talk to the leader of the Muslim Council of Wales, Salim Kibwai OBE, and we'd done all the multicultural things. We'd had the dinners and the events and hosted each other, and I said, it's time to get serious, basically. We've got to talk at another level. And so we set out on this journey of a round table design, not like this, on a round table design of engagement with Christians and Muslims in Wales. And we kept it to 80 people for each of 10 different meetings. And before we did this, of course, we had to do some deals with each other. And what I'd like to do is just to tell you a bit of a story about the process, and then place alongside it those 3 words: authority, extremism, and the internet. But I want to park the internet bit of this and just say something at the beginning and something at the end, but it goes throughout, because in the deprived areas of the estates, in the conurbations of Wales, along the M4 corridor, social workers were telling us that they were worried about the radicalization of young Muslims. And I remember one Muslim race equality worker came to me and said, I'm really concerned. We don't know what to do anymore because the internet's having such a huge impact. And she said, I was keen on setting up some dialogue with the Jewish community so that these young Muslim people could meet real Jewish people. Unfortunately, the Jewish people turned her down. The Jewish community turned her down, and that led to all sorts of pain and difficulty. Anyway, so the internet is part, but authority and extremism and these series of meetings. So we wanted to go beyond the convivial, and I think you all know what that means. And never mind those constructs about offline and online. For me, the question is, how do you really connect? However you connect. And that meant we had to look at 2 words, trust and honesty. And I don't think we do either of those particularly well. So what we did was we tried it out, a small group of us, first of all, and we said, well, look, what would it be like if a Christian stood up and said, I really find face masks difficult, because in my culture that's about bandits and terrorists. In your culture, it's about your choice and whatever else is motivating that kind of dress. And so we agreed that each of us would do a couple of case studies and about honesty and just say it in order to give permission to others in the round tables to say what they needed to say. And these were day events, and we finished with a residential. And the kind of things we looked at were science and evolution, cosmology, social inclusion, the media, and that was really interesting, and more about that in a moment. But we started with, because it was 9/11, we started with democracy, freedom, and religion. And we had 2 sessions on that. And we asked ourselves some hard questions about what liberal values really meant, and was there ever such a thing as a liberal space, a neutral space, which can do justice to the pluralism, sorry about that, not just the pluralism of multiculturalism, the lovely positive mix of goodies, like international food and cultures, but conflicted pluralism. Were liberal values enough to defend liberal democracies? And that, I guess we warned each other. We knew about Edward Said's work. We knew about the danger in the West of looking at the East through our own eyes and all that kind of thing. But in a mixed up, globalized world, those old sorts of geopolitics, culturally, were receding into the past. We knew about the clash of civilizations, temptation, and truth, and we wanted to handle that in a kind of sophisticated way and be honest about it. And that meant it wasn't enough just to say this is a media conspiracy and stereotyping. It was important, and many people started off using the media as the excuse for everything. Every stereotype is a construct of a media banality or self-interest. And we had to challenge that so we got a guy from the media, and we said, tell us what you think about Christianity, and we all discussed that, and then we said, tell us what you think about Islam. And obviously we briefed this guy to be really honest, and he gave us a terrible time. And it was really good for us. And round the round tables, always mixed on the round tables, people began to sympathize and show some empathy from what it's like to be a victim of stereotypes, but also to have to face some truths that the stereotypes carry. So we looked at post-multiculturalism, and we suddenly realized there's a truth in this. We looked at the way many Christians in history were oppressors and victims of a kind of multiculturalism which in different parts of the global world had ghettoized itself and expected other people to behave accordingly, the Christendom Project and so on. But we also looked at Islam and said it's really dangerous for Islam, as the reports on the northern cities riots in England and elsewhere showed, it's really dangerous to give any more fuel to the fire of extremist opposition of an Islamophobic kind to pluralism. And that meant we had to say to the Muslims, look, if you dress like that, and if your difference becomes a distance, and if your distance isolates you and excludes you, or if you exclude yourselves. And I did a check for 4 years. This project ran for 4 years. We just finished it. More than 4 years. And every time I walked or drove through the streets of Cardiff, Newport, and Swansea, I checked. Every time I saw a masked woman, did I ever see a non-masked white woman walking with her? Not once. So the ghettoization, and if you add language and touch and all of that to it. I was in Beirut when the cartoon issue hit, and we just came out of the camps of Shabra and Shatila, and we just met with Hezbollah on the southern Lebanese border. And the cartoon issue hit, and the press over there in Beirut were on to us. We were a fairly small, 12 of us, an ecumenical delegation, and they really went for us, and they wanted to know what was going on and so on. And this followed us. We were going to Lebanon and Syria. We had a meeting with the president of Syria, a 3-hour meeting with the president of Syria, and the same press were waiting for us outside of the room, wanting to know our reaction as Western Christians to obviously the cartoons, but obviously the vicious response, the burnings of churches and the killings. And I thought about that over the burning of the Quran issue and the response again. And I rang up my Sheikh friends, my Imam friends, and I said, tell me, what is more Islamic? To kill people or to protest over the burning of a book or a cartoon? What is more religious and what is more unreligious? And who decides? Who tells you how to behave? And who legitimates what I see as a Christian as a violent overreaction? And how am I supposed to understand that as a Western Christian? How do you help me understand why that would justify you doing what you did? And of course, then we unpack Western history, and we're off, aren't we? We do that. So we understood the need to be careful about theocracy, about caliphates, about Iran, and of course the style was always, we looked to our own communities first to kind of admit where there was a problem. Is that for me? No?
Soon.
Soon, okay. So we moved through, and one of the wonderful things that happened was that one of the sheikhs and I made a public commitment that what was first order belief should not be allowed to be mixed up with all sorts of cultural behaviors. And we said to each other in public that we would be willing to remove the cultural blocks of the way we practiced our religions for the sake of, and the phrase was, our common humanity in and under God. And we prayed together. We'd always had Christian prayers and Muslim prayers in the same room, but we managed finally to actually pray together in a circle and make that declaration. So you'd understand what I'm coming on to next, which is the pain of the next stage. Back to the videos. The real crunch and the real difference is the word fundamentalism and extremism. And for me, I had to say to them, look, I know how difficult it is with evangelical fundamentalists who take a literalist view of the text without ever considering what authority produces, what's the authority context for the text. So when I meet evangelical Christians who say, it says, therefore I'm going to do this, that, and the other, without any further discussion, then I've got a problem. And in conversations with Islam, we realized that it wasn't just the extremists. It was not just the extremists, but it was mainstream Christian belief to look at the Quran in that way. So we began to call for a reformation in Islam. And of course, there are many people across the world calling for this when it comes to the authority of the text. Now, why is this relevant? I've spent a few days on and off looking at the jihadist videos and all the programs I could find which challenged them and supported them. And I began to doubt what I was seeing, but here's the difference. Here's what I ended up with, really. You know the defense that many British Muslims will say, they will accuse the media and say that when a Muslim scientist makes a breakthrough, or a celebrity or a star or something, a sports person, the media will say British so-and-so broke a record or invented something or whatever. When it's an extremist thing, they'll say Muslim extremist, Muslim terrorist. And we had to say to each other, hang on a minute, when the Muslim terrorist does something in the name of the Quran and Allah, that's very different from the Muslim scientist who doesn't use that language in the same way. And when I looked at all these videos, and I looked at Robert Spencer's work, for example, in Jihad Watch, it's really hard for me now because I cannot dismiss these devout, young, pious men. If you look at some of the groups in Taliban, Al-Qaeda, as they travel through those countrysides, praying 5 times a day, sharing the Quran, sharing full Muhammad for Islamic discipline with each other, they have a spirituality and a devoutness that comes straight from what is central, not what is peripheral to their faith. And that's the hard thing, I think, for the liberals in the Muslim community to come to terms with. And the real implication of that for me is that it's a mistake to dismiss this as kind of out there, with whatever pathology you like to put on it. This is something very central and the authority issue of who makes the loop, who links up the text with context, and when will that be broken in our two different traditions in a way that opens up and heals and helps us understand? Because I don't think we'll solve the problem with more invasions, and a military response to any of these international problems is going to be very tricky. I've overrun. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
So our second speaker is Joshua Fouts. He's a senior fellow in digital media and public policy at the Center for Study of the Presidency and Congress, and a next generation fellow at the American Assembly. Fouts is a writer, researcher, consultant, and strategist on the use of digital media for science, faith, culture, education, research, and public policy. His writings and work have been featured in the news and in digital media worldwide, and his work with his collaborator, Rita J. King, on digital faith and cultural relations has also been presented worldwide.
Thanks very much. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to the Tony Blair Faith Foundation for the invitation, to Drew Collins for his excellent work in organizing and coordinating the whole thing. It's been seamless. Commendations. Many thanks to the RSA for hosting this, and Durham University. This has been a very, very interesting and exciting gathering to be a part of. Since 2007, my collaborator, Rita J. King, and I have engaged in work that explores all aspects of a new global culture and economy in what we call the imagination age, which we view as a contextual framework for the current era of our human evolution. Perfect. I just realized there we go, perfect. But for those of you in the audience, the screens images were spinning wildly in front of me. In 2009, Rita J. King and I released the findings of a project called Digital Diplomacy, Understanding Islam Through Virtual Worlds. This was funded by a grant from the Richard Lounsbury Foundation, and we conducted the research as senior fellows at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. We spent a year traveling across 4 continents in the physical world and throughout the virtual world to research and understand this cultural issue. The results included policy recommendations which were presented to the Obama White House. They also included a graphic novel, the cover of which you see here, and a documentary filmed entirely inside the virtual world of Second Life. All of these findings are freely available online for you to download, view, and we encourage you to do so. Given the time constraints of today, I won't be able to share that information with you. The image on the cover of this book is an avatar of a woman from Doha, Qatar, one of the scores of people we interviewed in over 22 countries around the world for the project. Before I go into some of our findings, I want to start with some baseline descriptions. We've touched on a number of these terms throughout the day, but I want to set my baselines specifically as background for this project. An avatar, as we define it, is a 3-dimensional figure that could be from anyone around the world. One can present themselves as anything. This gets to the heart of identity and understanding. If you can be whatever you want to be and express yourself in a visual manner, do we fully understand what extremism is? Once you have an avatar, and you can make into anything, avatars can be simple or complex. Even on Twitter, which many of us are using today, avatars can be used to represent ourselves in ways that are meaningful or authentic or deceptive. What's a virtual world? Virtual worlds are 3D, immersive, computer-based environments that are accessible via the internet. In some virtual worlds, everything you see has been created for you. In others, you can create whatever you want. In those that are entirely user-created, such as the research venues that we explored in the Understanding Islam Through Virtual Worlds project, people from all over the world were building mosques, temples, synagogues in an effort to express themselves and their faith authentically in these environments. The Abrahamic faiths are very well represented in these venues, but not only Abrahamic faiths, but Eastern faiths, as well as people who are concerned about the future of religion. For additional perspective on this, over 1 billion children worldwide between the ages of 8 and 14, according to statistics from the K0 research consultancy, are currently participants in the virtual world. And I find this number extremely significant because it informs us of the incubator in which tomorrow's leaders are learning about life in a hybrid reality. Is it real? I believe we need to overcome some of the rhetorical statements that we use, especially real versus virtual. When two people are interacting via a virtual environment, those are two real people who are communicating. That experience in and of itself is real. Often the cartoonish experiences of virtual worlds can cause people to dismiss them as being unreal. I also believe that because virtual worlds are the newest form of technology that has entered into our internet-based discourse, that we are most resistant to that. There's a long history of humans having a resistance to the newest forms of technology. When Samuel Morse invented the telegraph, it was decried by the media and people as being the tell-lie graph. It was a computer-mediated medium that was going to create dissonance between the human experience. Why should people take virtual worlds seriously? When we first began our research project, Rita J. King and I teleported into the landing space at the foots of the virtual Hajj to Mecca. The virtual Hajj to Mecca, before we even entered into the space, we were greeted by two avatars, one of whom was hailing from the North Caucasus region, which many of you may know is a war-torn region that has suffered much strife around religious conflicts, certainly around Islam as well. As we began to engage in conversation with these two using chat and text only, Rita mentioned the fact that she had been studying jihad, which is the self-reflective form of Islam. It's different from jihad, and it's often not discussed widely. The person from the North Caucasus responded with that he was aghast. This is exactly why he doesn't like to talk to Westerners. But Rita then said, could you scroll up through the chat log and see that actually I was talking about I typed a different word. I asked you specifically about jihad. The person then scrolled, took a few minutes, came back and said, you know, I'm sorry, I was wrong about that. This is a conversation that, had it occurred in the physical world, might likely have ended at the beginning of that question where the question was misunderstood and the person could leave. However, given that we were in a safe environment where there was no opportunity for physical violence, we had a moment to take a breath and to continue the conversation. Later in our research, we found that that person was very helpful in opening up lots of doors and insights into communication on the topic matter. The virtual Hajj to Mecca is built by an organization, a Qatari and an Egypt-based organization called IslamOnline.net. It's a 3D representation of Mecca. It was built by a team in Egypt, and it was intended to inform and educate Muslims as well as non-Muslims about the Hajj. It's an experience that we as non-Muslims would not have the opportunity to have in the physical world, and nor would we like to say that it would replace that experience. However, it did provide some information to the unique aspects of that experience. We were led on a tour of all the various aspects of the Hajj. This is documented in our documentary, in which we learned about the very symbology of all the elements, again, something that we wouldn't have had an opportunity to experience in the physical space. There is another community in the virtual world that has created a replica of 13th century Andalusia, the period in which southern Spain was ruled by an Islamic caliphate. The community consists of residents from around the world. Those residents are very interested in trying to explore how to coexist despite religious differences. A quandary arose, and here we have a picture of the mosque that they've built. A Swedish man who was a 20-year convert to Islam, believed that it was disrespectful to leave one's digital shoes on when entering into the Al-Andalus Mosque. We know that it is a respected tradition to remove shoes in the physical world when entering into a physical world mosque, but should the same rules be applied to a digital mosque? The physics of this are somewhat different in the virtual world, in that removing your shoes might mean you never would see your shoes again. I don't know how many of you have lost a file on your computer, but the maddening process of trying to find that piece of digital item is actually even more confusing in some virtual worlds where the file keeping system is completely disorganized and your shoes might go away and your avatar would be barefoot, or a prized pair of shoes would never be found again. In 2010, I did a follow-up visitation to the various places that we researched in our 2009 report. And I interviewed a picture. This is a picture of a woman by the name of, whose avatar is named Imotali. She is a Singaporean graduate student. As I interviewed Imotali, I noticed that she was spending a lot of time by herself in the Al-Andalus Mosque. The article that I wrote about this was published in Saudi Aramco World this past summer. I asked her what it was that she liked about the mosque, and she said that virtual worlds bring her closer to Allah. I said, could you explain that? She explained that in her mosque in Singapore, in the physical world, it was a very, very densely populated mosque. It was one in which, because of the dense population, and out of deference and modesty, she never actually got to worship in the central part of the mosque, which was the most elaborate and architecturally impressive. And for her purposes, she felt was the most spiritually powerful and compelling space. So she always went to a separate side room among other women to worship in that room. But she said that the architecture was so compelling that she needed to have that to feel the true spiritual power and energy that she wanted to have in her worship. So she found that in a virtual space. Again, it's not something that replaces the physical, but it's something that augmented and provided a certain specific spiritual need. How many of you would consider this image an image of extremism? This is an image from a 2008 protest in the virtual world of Second Life that was conducted in response to the conflict between Gaza and Israel when missiles were being fired between those two regions. We interviewed the person whose avatar this is and asked him why was he choosing this imagery to express himself. He said that it wasn't that he actually wanted to self-immolate, although today's headlines would confirm that form of expression actually launched in Tunisia an entire revolution throughout the Middle East. He said that the reason he chose to do this is because his heart burned in anger and sorrow for both sides. He wasn't doing it to criticize specifically the Israeli government. He wasn't doing it specifically to criticize the Palestinians that were in conflict with the Israelis in Gaza. He was doing it because he felt that the image was an image that authentically expressed his frustration. And I think because of the tensions around these images, it creates a conflict within ourselves where we might see that and say, oh, that's an extremist image. We can't show it. When in fact this person didn't intend to say or to express that he was going to actually engage in the same kind of behavior in the physical world. If our goal is truly to undermine extremism, we have found, we believe, a new medium in which there is no possibility for physical violence or physical intimidation of any kind. Virtual worlds truly have the greatest potential for undermining extremism by humanizing the other. And if we're really ready to embrace that idea, the idea of greater understanding in order to minimize extremism, then these sorts of environments need to be truly explored and not misunderstood as cartoonish environments, but places where people really express themselves. Thank you very much.
Joshua is actually under time, so he should receive a second round of applause from everyone. Remarkably good, Joshua. Very interesting. And our final speaker is Gary Bunt. And Gary is a senior lecturer in Islamic Studies at the Higher Education Academy and the University of Wales, Trinity, St. David. Gary is based at the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of Wales, Trinity, St. David, where he's a senior lecturer in Islamic Studies. He also works on the subject of for the Subject Center as academic coordinator. All these titles. Having been involved in the center since its inception in 2000. He runs the website virtuallyislamic.com. Many of us probably, though, also know Gary from his several books, all dealing with virtual Islam. And he's probably the primary name associated with Islam Online, which he started investigating long before the rest of us were basically aware it existed.
Got my stopwatch. under starters orders. Here we go. I think I've got about 12 minutes, or maybe an extra minute now. It's a bit like trying to tweet my book into one tweet to cover all the areas in relation to religious authority. And I'm going to be looking a little bit at some of the concepts associated with that. And I've also been asked to do something on jihadi expression online. So obviously this is all very compressed, but you can unpack it more in some of my books. Firstly, a little bit about my approach, because there's lots of possible approaches to this kind of subject matter. I like to record, chronicle, narrate, and hopefully analyze material in relation to Islam and the internet. I've been looking at this for 15 to 20 years in different forms. Pre-browser, I can remember looking at different discussion groups and listservs and emails, and famously crashing my university server with the amount of material coming through. It was a very primitive server, but you get the idea of the amount of traffic that I was looking at the time. What I do is, what I've tried to do is look at this material from a whole broad range of materials associated with Islam, although I'm looking at religious authority today and jihadi materials as well. I look at other things too in a religious studies framework, which is very sort of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary in nature. And one of the things that surprised me about this subject area is the types of conferences I've been invited to, which are way outside of my comfort zone in terms of disciplinary perspectives, because there is so much interest within this sphere and so much more research to do. I'm very interested in phenomenology, so that's the sort of symbols, religious language, ideas of the sacred and leadership, and also internet trends relating to Islamic expression. Because of reasons of time, there's always something new in my in-tray or on Facebook or on the net every day. I can't always do a detailed content analysis of every page that turns up, because I've got other duties in the university and people get upset. So line-by-line examinations of materials, whilst desirable, aren't always feasible. I like to try and provide snapshots of what's going on within what I describe as cyber-Islamic environments. One thing, of course, you have to remember is you can't believe everything that you see on the internet, and one is always conscious of that when looking at Islamic materials in relation to different religious perspectives. So a lot of what I have to do is unpick where material is coming from, looking at site origins, trying to track back some of the pages and materials. And that's not the sort of traditional skill that one picks up within a Department of Theology and Religious Studies, so I've sort of augmented my skill set with some of those interesting techie bits as well. So cyber-Islamic environments is my umbrella term. It's an evolving term that I use for diverse interfaces and understandings of Islam and the net. And of course it encompasses Web 2 now, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. The definition is evolving as we progress, hopefully progress. So in a nuanced information marketplace, religious authority manifests itself in many ways with entry-level sites, portals, specialist interest sites, online question and answer pages. Islam is always on if an individual wants it like that. There's a lot of mundane content too. The mundane, I think, is very important. It doesn't always hit the headlines, but a lot of the day-to-day transactions that take place online, I think, are equally significant, and I try to track and record some of those as well. We've got different forms of entry in terms of cyber-Islamic environments, so increasingly we're looking at mobile phones as well as an entry point. We've seen that most recently in the events of the past 3 or 4 months. I'm interested in this whole idea of multiple identities and the way that they manifest themselves online as well. You'll be seeing a few different screen grabs going flying by. I'm not able to commentate on all of them at once because there's rather a lot of them, but just to give you a snapshot, we were talking about our 15 seconds of looking at each page. You're going to get some of that here. To give you a flavour of some of the images that one sees online. Traditional frontiers of Muslim religious knowledge and authority have been reframed in the context of the internet. So diverse phenomena and concepts associated with Islam, seeking to present ideas of authority, are available online. The reduction of the digital divide, so-called digital divide, has had an impact, and of course the cell phone increase as well as having an impact on how people mediate this information, how people acquire knowledge, including some of the online fatwas that I'm going to be looking at very quickly. In my book, I'm Muslims, I talk about different types of ideas in relation to cyber-Islamic environments and different forms of authority, different ways in which the information shifts. So we've got globalized Islam, community-centered, regional Islam, forms of social networking, going all the way through to different interpretive models, ideas about authority, political Islam, militaristic jihad, and so on. So entry points are very important. New concepts associated with the transmission of knowledge introduce some traditional models of interpretation and understanding and integrate them within digital frameworks as well. For technologically literate Muslim surfers, there can be a specific and intimate relationship between technologies and their religious beliefs, with a liminal or transitory element in between. This site here is one of the popular portals, Islam.com. Somebody was very clever to buy up that particular domain early on. I don't know how much it's worth now, it must be worth a fortune. But this is one typical entry point where people will go into Google and look for information about Islam. We're talking about attention spans earlier on and people having limited attention spans. So this is going to be one of the top rated sites that would appear on looking at a Google search. Islam Online was mentioned earlier on as well in terms of being another one of the popular entry points. We can't underestimate the significance of the portals in a period of information overload in terms of getting this information across and being sort of gatekeepers of knowledge. So there are many different entry points that one will find for different ideas about religious knowledge and information. Traditional sources, of course, including the Quran, have manifested themselves online in a number of different ways, and control of the Quran entry points is very significant. We see a number of different translations with different types of commentaries that appear online, and they're very significant as well because they do have authority, they do have influence, and in some portals you will find different translations, different commentaries with different nuances of meaning. So the Quran is very important in this regard. We see this with apps as well, the Quran app was being demonstrated downstairs. Traditional centres such as Al-Azhar have attempted to go online with different degrees of success. They weren't necessarily very successful initially, but it's got slightly better as it's moved on. They've had a few problems with their entry points. The thing about the religious authority issue is where people are going to get their information from, so whether they can rely on sites that appear, what turns up early on within a Google search is very important. The interesting thing too is that people will find specialist knowledge associated with their micro-interests or with their micro-affiliations as well. So to look at a couple of places where people might go, Amr Khalid is very popular in terms of presenting opinions, very media savvy. Incidentally, a graduate of the University of Wales, and he is presenting a very important sort of streamed idea of popular Islam and interpretation. And this is a model that's been followed by many others as well. The Qaradawi organization has been very prominent online in terms of presenting information. That doesn't necessarily mean that Yusuf Qaradawi has been sitting at a laptop putting in his own opinions, but he's got a team of people around him that are doing that job for him and have done a very, very effective job. The use of video is being applied very effectively too. People are able to post their opinions, post their ideas about religious authority very quickly. We see the ideas associated with databases such as Islam Online, where people can shop around for different religious opinions. Islam Online has now sort of been replaced in many ways by On Islam, where a number of the original employees went and joined On Islam. You can shop around for an opinion, perhaps that suits individual interests, search a database and try and find opinions. Opinions also are available online via mobile phones, where you can contact scholars and you pay a certain fee to get that information across. So that's one element in terms of religious authority and the way it manifests itself online. In a couple of minutes, just to talk a little bit about ideas relating to jihad and electronic jihad, which is another form, a separate type of form of authority in relation to religion and religious expression. Of course, there are many different definitions of jihad, and it manifests itself in many different ways. And we can't sort of provide a homogeneous definition. There's different forms of jihad which are unpacked in many different publications I can point you towards. Most recently, we've seen some manifestations of this appear online on Facebook. For example, after the Stockholm bombing late last year, where Facebook was used, and then the film associated with the individual associated with that event appeared on different fora online, including integration of other media channels and opinions and discussion, which was all happening very quickly around the events. I've got a model of e-jihad there, which I haven't got time really to go into now, but it does include, in my model, hacking and cracking as well as other forms of cyber activism. Al-Qaeda is one element within the electronic jihad paradigm, but there are others, of course. Back in the 90s, many significant sites such as Hezbollah appeared online presenting their interpretation of jihad. We had Palestinian interests too, this with an example of a martyrs gallery back in the late 90s. And separately, Azam Publications, which was interesting because it was a collection of feeds from different areas, Chechnya, Afghanistan, Kashmir and other areas, brought together as a portal, so it's a one-stop entry point for people to discuss, look at films and explore ideas associated with jihad. So campaigns such as in Chechnya obtained a higher profile than they would have done prior to the emergence of the net. After 9/11, that says my time's almost up. After 9/11, of course, we saw a growth in the way that Al-Qaeda was applying the internet in different ways on different fora, successfully integrating the net to provide statements, film clips, manifestos, and to discuss operations in different levels with different activists and members of the general public as well. This meant a more nuanced idea about electronic jihad and the way it could present itself, including games in some contexts, such as the night of Bush capturing, which came out several years ago. Osama bin Laden's statements, of course, and then into Iraq and the types of digital media that were applied in relation to campaigns in Iraq, which linked into jihadi statements. Interesting in terms of the use of graphics and the different symbols that were applied on websites, very sophisticated use of graphics, use of photographs from different sources, including so-called Western newspapers as well, the use of multimedia, and the development of specific media channels, such as the global, the GIMF, Global Islamic Media Front, where we saw news broadcasts such as this one. There were some logistical issues here about having a news broadcast from a news broadcaster who had his face covered. Didn't necessarily aid the clarity, but it was important in terms of providing a channel for information. And that nuanced channel included, in 2004, the emergence of this jihadi rap, which was a montage of different media clips with a musical backing as well. And most recently, just to wrap up, the development of magazines, online magazines, has been brought into the spotlight most recently with the Inspire magazine. This is the latest issue from a week or so ago, an English language jihadi magazine, slickly produced with a number of different statements, ideas about online activism, how to get involved in quite a deep level in terms of jihadi operations, providing justification for the modus operandi, and even providing detailed ways of getting into chat rooms without being caught. So that's, just to conclude, that's my very, very quick summary of jihadi materials, and it's just to say that I would encourage anybody who's interested in research and looking for a research avenue that Islam and the internet, there's plenty of material that still needs to be explored and unpacked in detail.
Great, thank you very much, Gary.